Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing the next special of the Pokemon anime, which focuses on Casey, that character from the Johto series, called Those Darn Electabuzz. The episode begins with a baseball game between Casey's favorite team, Team Electabuzz, and another random-ass team. It was currently the 9th inning, according to a TV broadcast announcer, and the score was currently 3-2, with the visiting team, the Electabuzz, in the lead. Those first 2 points had to have come from the opposing team's earliest rounds, whereas the 3 points for Team Electabuzz came from round 5 with 1 point, and round 8 with 2 points. Casey was currently watching the game from a display TV outside of a store in a town, and the bases were then loaded. And after a full count, the Electabuzz pitcher got his sign to throw the ball, and the Team Electabuzz pitcher wound up his throw and made a great pitch. Nah, just kidding. The batter on the opposing team manages to hit the ball all the way into the outfield bleachers for a game-winning home run. So, as you can imagine, Casey was severely disappointed, not just because her favorite team, Team Electabuzz, had lost this game, but also because they'd been on a losing streak. And Casey knew for a fact that the losing streak was due to the loss of the team's star pitcher, Corey DeMario. And she knew that if Corey DeMario came back, then the losing streak would be over in a heartbeat, and the entire team did too, which was why they really wanted him back. Casey got to the point of collapsing due to sadness, so she went to a park bench to rest. She was primarily sad because the Electabuzz team had lost 10 times in a row. Casey decided to try and cheer herself up by sending out her 3 Pokemon, Meganium, Elekid, and Beedrill. Yes, the Beedrill that Ash gave her. Anyways, she didn't really get cheered up as soon as she sent out her Pokemon, because they just instantly went to sleep. Suddenly, Casey was startled as she saw a tired-looking Charizard running towards her, being chased by a boy and a young man, who were likely trying to get Charizard back as they called out for Dawn, presumably Charizard's nickname. Casey decides to help the 2 guys get Charizard, and does so by ordering her 3 Pokemon to wake up and band together to stop Charizard. But as soon as they manage to get up, Dawn runs so fast that he just knocks Meganium, Beedrill, and Elekid over before they can do any attacks. Casey runs over to her Pokemon to make sure they were okay, and tries to encourage them to get up as she calls out for Charizard to stop, yelling at him loudly, but Charizard just ignores her and continues to run towards her, and was about to run her over when suddenly the young man who had been pursuing Charizard, its owner, did a flying tackle towards her and managed to tackle her down and out of Charizard's entire path, leading Charizard to keep running, finally stopping as it bashes its head inside a piece of playground equipment. The man who saved Casey then apologizes to her for Charizard's actions and asks if she was okay, which Casey confirms as she thanks the man, but then Casey becomes in awe and freaked out and shit when she recognizes the guy who saved her as Corey DeMario, the old pitcher for the Electabuzz team, the star pitcher who had left just recently. And we then see Casey imagining in her head all the great pitches that Corey DeMario had made throughout his career. It's then revealed that Corey DeMario had stopped playing because he injured his shoulder, as Casey asked how his shoulder was coming along, still in an amazed state at the fact that she was really meeting Corey to begin with. Corey confirmed that it obviously was taking a long time to heal, since he still wasn't back to playing, and tells her that he has been helping his father, Shigeo, with his Pokemon breeding ranch during his recovery, so he was at least doing something. Casey then rapidly shook Corey's hand, going into fangirl mode at the fact that she was meeting her idol practically, embarrassing Corey a bit when suddenly the young boy who had also been running after Charizard approached. And Corey introduces him to Casey as Benny, his younger brother, and actually the owner of the Charizard. Charizard used to be his, but after training it enough, Corey gave it to his younger brother, Benny. Benny then apologizes, even though his brother had already apologized for him for the behavior of his Charizard, Dawn, but explained that he had accidentally said something to Charizard while training it that pissed it off, and gave it some faulty orders because he was having trouble training Charizard, and as a result, Dawn went on a rampage, and was likely trying to run back to Corey's father's breeding center for support, because it was just against training, period, it seemed like, because regardless of what Benny would say to Charizard, it would seem to always disobey regardless. We then see that Charizard had finally pulled out its head from the playground equipment, but immediately after this, Meganium, Elekid, and Beedrill finally came up to Charizard and were angry at it for running them over, so they intimidated it by angrily staring him down. And Charizard was so frightened by this that it purposely put its head back in the piece of playground equipment, trying to hide, leading Corey to explain that Charizard was scared because it was assuming that Meganium, Beedrill, and Elekid obviously wanted to battle, and it hadn't battled in a long time, which caused it to forget how to use Flamethrower and forget how to fly, so it was basically useless in battle, with Benny confirming all this, as he tried to train Charizard, but it was impossible. Casey immediately felt bad for Charizard, and Corey and Benny asked for help, potentially training Charizard, and Casey agreed, really desperate to help, stating that the Electabuzz weren't quitters, so Charizard shouldn't quit either. So, fired up, Casey went, leaving Benny and Corey behind, as she climbed on top of the piece of playground equipment that Charizard's head was stuck in, and started to sing the Electabuzz song with the help of her Pokemon in an attempt to boost Charizard's spirits, basically hoping that would give a whole bunch of motivation to Charizard to battle again. Even though Charizard was kind of annoyed by the cheering for the Electabuzz at first, eventually the cheering was enough to motivate Charizard to stand up and start talking to Casey, who instantly challenged Charizard to a battle. Corey then ran up to Charizard, thinking that the cheering must have helped it if it was willing to get up, and Corey ordered Dawn to use a flamethrower. However, when Charizard Dawn tried to use flamethrower, it only manages to release a small patch of smoke. Casey encouraged Charizard to try again, but even though Charizard was crying basically at this point, it forced itself to try again, but it didn't even get a puff of smoke this time. Just nothing came out. It really couldn't use flamethrower. It was so disappointed that it started bawling its eyes out and turned around and ran away. Casey scolds Charizard for running, yelling for it to come back, but it didn't listen, and it only encouraged Charizard to run away further, leading Casey to state how surprised she was that Charizard was so sensitive. Benny then declares that he was going to go running after his Charizard to make sure it didn't get lost, and he does so, while Corey asks if Casey wanted to come for dinner at his father's ranch, stating that Benny would probably come as well once he had rounded up his Charizard, and Casey happily agreed, as she would love to have dinner with a former star player of Team Electabuzz. Later that evening, around dinner time, Casey had joined Corey at Corey's father's breeding ranch. Casey was instantly introduced to Corey's father, Shigeo, who was home, and Shigeo instantly showed Casey a large collection of Team Electabuzz photos, particularly focusing on Corey playing with them, because, obviously Shigeo would keep the photos that focused on his son. And Casey remarked how Shigeo was definitely supportive of his son's baseball career, as he appeared to be quite a fan of the Electabuzz team, just like she was. Casey then started to gush to Corey's father about how happy she was to meet him, as she and Corey's father examined a picture of Corey winning a baseball championship and holding the trophy. At this, Casey asked Shigeo how he felt about Corey not currently playing, and asked him how much he wanted Corey to get back in the game, and Shigeo revealed that he really wanted his son to get back in the game since he was fully able to. Casey asked Corey's father, Shigeo, what he meant by this, leading Shigeo to reveal that even though he did in fact injure his shoulder and even his arm, that shit healed months ago, but Corey was deliberately not going back into baseball because he lost his confidence and didn't think he was a good pitcher anymore since he had lost his arm, since he had injured his arm and shoulder while pitching. And we then see a flashback of Corey briefly injuring his shoulder, but it getting better quite quickly. And Shigeo also explained that the reason why Benny currently had Charizard was actually because Shigeo had essentially forced Corey to give it to him, since Corey had also lost his confidence in battling, so he wanted Charizard to still battle with a trainer, even if that wasn't its original one, so he chose Benny. With a secondary goal in mind, not only did he want Charizard to regain its battling skills that it had lost because it had been so long, he wanted Charizard being able to regain its battling skills to motivate Corey to think that he could get back his baseball skills now that his shoulder has healed. Basically, he wanted Corey to get inspired by Charizard, to the point where he would be so inspired that he would rejoin Team Electabuzz. Speaking of Benny, just as he walked in the room, Casey revealed what had happened earlier in the day, where she was able to encourage Charizard to regain confidence a little bit and retry a flamethrower simply by singing to it. And this made Shigeo excited, stating that if Casey was able to encourage Charizard to use flamethrower, maybe she could encourage Corey to go into baseball again. Explained to her how much that would help Team Electabuzz as well, which Casey was already well aware of. Benny then pleaded for Casey to help out as well, and since Casey wanted to help out Corey, Benny, Shigeo, and Team Electabuzz, she happily agreed, exclaiming that she was going to help Corey and Dawn get their fire back, leaving Benny and Shigeo immensely happy, declaring that they were going to help too. They were all going to get Corey and Dawn's fire back, declaring their true mission to get Corey to return to the Electabuzz baseball team and restore the Electabuzz baseball team to its former glory. Although it was getting pretty late tonight though, so Casey, Shigeo, and Benny decided to hold off till tomorrow, but first thing in the morning, they went outside. Although Casey had admitted the night before that even though she got Charizard to use flamethrower, it definitely wasn't looking to do it again, so she would have to convince Charizard to get back to fighting as well. So basically priority number one was Corey, but a close second in terms of priorities was Dawn the Charizard as well. Although Casey's plan involved subconsciously getting Corey to regain his confidence, so when she called him over, she didn't reveal her plan at all. She simply just said that she was going to help Charizard get his confidence back, and she wanted his help along with Benny's. So she started instructing Charizard on how to regain his confidence with the help of Benny and Corey, while Shigeo, on the other hand, was hiding behind a tree, watching the situation, not wanting his son Corey to see him or some shit. Since Shigeo probably thought that his son might think that there was something more than just trying to get his Charizard to regain its spirits if Shigeo was involved. Shigeo then listened as Casey stated that she was going to try her best to help Charizard regain its confidence, leading Shigeo to silently pray that Casey's strategy would work. Anyways, Casey then put her plan into action as she called out her Meganium, Elekid, and Beedrill, and stated that they were going to help Charizard regain his confidence by cheering, adding that Charizard and Corey were supposed to cheer as well, along with her and Benny. Basically, they were all going to cheer, and this cheering was meant to get rid of every doubt and insecurity in Charizard's mind, although it was also supposed to help Corey get rid of any doubt and insecurities, but she didn't tell Corey this. Corey was a bit hesitant that cheering would work, although he eventually agreed when he saw that Benny was all for the cheering idea, and with that, Benny, Corey, Casey, Charizard, Meganium, Beedrill, and Elekid all cheered loudly, with Benny and Corey doing the loudest cheers, and Dawn doing a relatively quiet cheer after Casey had started off the cheer by saying a happy line about getting rid of your doubts and insecurities. Casey was then instructing Corey, Benny, and all the Pokemon to cheer and encourage each other as well with nice sayings to get their spirits up, and they did this as well. And finally, the last thing for cheering was everyone cheering all at once. So, Casey told them that it was now time for Phase 2, as Corey's father, Shigeo, watched, smiling, approving of Casey's training. Casey then started to go on and on, as she stood upon a rock happily, that cheerleading was a great way to boost confidence. So, with that, she declared that it was time to begin the cheerleading, specifically cheering the electabuzz dance. And she suddenly ripped off her jacket so that she was only wearing her cheerleader outfit underneath it, which startled Corey, Benny, and Dawn, as they didn't know how to react to this, and they also seemed pretty reluctant to get into cheerleading outfits of their own and cheerlead. But a few seconds later, Casey had managed to convince them to put on cheerleading outfits of their own, aside from Charizard, obviously, who was only holding the cheerleading pom-poms. And everyone was using the pom-poms and dancing while being instructed by Casey, who was leading them in some impromptu cheerleading training. The cheerleading wasn't going extremely well, as Casey saw that both Benny and Corey started to get embarrassed in their cheerleading outfits, which Corey confirmed, stating that he hoped no one on Team Electabuzz saw him in a cheerleading outfit and doing cheerleading. But Corey was glad that at least Charizard seemed to be enjoying the cheerleading, and Benny was trying his best to act like he was. And Corey and Casey and Benny were all excited to see that Charizard was enjoying the cheerleading so much that it made a few little jumps as it followed the cheering instructions. Upon seeing this, Corey, Benny, and Casey encouraged Charizard to jump higher and try and fly. And it tries to, but it only ends up flying about 1 meter before falling down to the ground. Despite Charizard falling flat on his back, though, Casey encourages Charizard to not give up and keep trying. And it obliges, and each time it tries to fly, it ends up gaining a little bit of height each time. But it still ends up falling down each time as well, so it was making progress, but not monumental progress. Seeing his Charizard failing, Corey started to worry about what would happen if he tried to go back to pitching, like how Charizard was trying to go back to flying. And he had a vision of him warming up his pitch on the bullpen in the baseball stadium, but when he threw the ball, the catcher ended up scolding him because he wouldn't pitch like he used to. And the worst part of the vision was all of his teammates on Team Electabuzz criticizing him for how bad he had gotten, and because of this, he leaves the stadium. Eventually, though, Benny thankfully snaps Corey out of his little vision by asking him if he was okay after seeing him zone out, and Corey confirms. And Casey then stated that since Charizard had started to fly a little bit, it had likely gotten all that it could out of the cheerleading if it couldn't fully fly because of it, so she suggested that they move on to something else. Corey asked what was next, and Casey then got an idea, and suggested this idea to Corey and Benny. She suggested that it was now time for Charizard to battle to fully regain his confidence. Benny and Corey were skeptical, thinking that Charizard wasn't ready yet, but in order for Shigeo to show his support for this idea, he suddenly emerges from behind the tree and offers to battle Charizard using his Ampharos. And Casey obviously agrees, and even though Corey and Benny didn't want to, they kind of felt pressured to agree to have Charizard battle, so they all went back by the house, and the battle began, with Casey stating that this battle would be a great idea, since it would show Charizard's burning spirit emerge. Corey still wasn't confident, and he also didn't think Charizard was even ready, so he didn't take command of Charizard, forcing Casey to battle with it instead against Shigeo's Ampharos, with Corey deciding to act as the referee at least. The battle begins with Ampharos using a tackle, and this hits Charizard, so Casey orders Charizard to use a flamethrower to counter, but Charizard still couldn't use the flamethrower well, even with the cheerleading and all that shit, leading Casey to get mad and scolded, but since Casey didn't order another attack, Ampharos took the opportunity to prepare a Thunder Punch, leading Casey to quickly come up with the idea to test Charizard's flight abilities, telling it to fly up and dodge the Thunder Punch. Charizard manages to flap its wings hard and rise up into the air a little bit, but just like before, it only stayed in the air for a short time and landed right as the Thunder Punch hit it, leading Charizard to fall on its stomach and cover its head and its hands in pain and shame that it lost, which Corey officially declared, saying that Ampharos was the winner, along with Shigeo. Casey then goes up to Shigeo and his Ampharos and congratulates them for winning the match and starts to be mean to Dawn, saying that it really sucked, especially for a Charizard. Which makes Benny angry, as he didn't like to see Charizard insulted, and he states that the real problem as to why Charizard couldn't win the battle was because Casey hadn't trained it well enough, like she said she was going to, and Corey joins in on the argument, taking Benny's side. So now, Benny and Corey were against Casey. Casey then rebuts that her training was not the issue whatsoever, so this made Corey pissed off, and suggests that he should train Charizard himself, if Casey wasn't going to be doing some good training. And this was actually what Casey wanted, so she tries to encourage this by making Corey even angrier, bringing up how she knew that Corey was actually lying about his shoulder injury, and he was just not playing because he was too scared now that people wouldn't think he was as skilled, and accused him of being a quitter, just like Charizard. Just as Casey had planned, Corey declared that he was going to oversee Dawn's training from now on, and train him all by himself, and was determined to prove Casey wrong, and prove to her that it was basically just Casey's training that was at fault. and therefore he and Dawn rushed off into the mountains to train, determined that he could get him back into shape where Casey had failed. It was then revealed that Benny had been yelling at Casey just to purposely provoke Corey even further. He wasn't actually mad at Casey, because Casey had been being a horrible coach on purpose just to enforce Corey to go train Charizard by himself, and now he was. So Shigeo and Benny thanked Casey for all her help and congratulated her on actually managing to fire up Corey and Charizard and get them training together again. Casey admitted that she did feel bad for being a little too harsh and, basically calling Dawn terrible and all that, but she knew that it was necessary, and Shigeo and Benny assured her that it was necessary, with Shigeo stating that it was really the only way to get Corey and his Charizard back together, and Benny congratulating Casey on her bad acting, as he genuinely kind of felt mad at her for a second, even though he knew that Casey was just fucking around. Meanwhile, Corey and Charizard were now training together on the mountain that was in a canyon known as Bloom Canyon, and Corey said that the first part of him and Charizard training together was going to be to run to the top of the mountain to get themselves fired up, as they remembered when they used to run to the top of the mountain all the time. Once Corey and Charizard had made it to the top and regained their breath, since they were tired as fuck for not doing this for a while, Corey happened to be looking down the edge of the mountain and saw the river below and more mountain on the other side of the river. So Corey got an idea to test Charizard's flight training by having it fly from this mountain across the river to the other side of the mountain, stating that that was how Charizard first learned to practice its flying in the first place. They would always come up to the mountain and fly across the river. Despite this, Charizard was immensely scared, thinking that it would fall. And this led Corey to begin comparing himself to Charizard and how he was so hesitant to go back to baseball. And he remembers everything that Casey had told him and realized that Casey was right. He had quit baseball, even though the electabuzz were never supposed to quit, and that meant that he shouldn't quit either, and nor should Charizard. So he gave Charizard a pep talk, telling it that he knew he could fly, and told him to stop being a coward and stop doubting himself, like how he had been a coward to not return to baseball after his shoulder injury. Charizard seemed motivated now, so it jumped and started to fly, but it almost forgot to flap its wings, so Corey had to remind it, and upon being reminded, Charizard did start flapping its wings, but then it looked down and saw the deep water below that was very far down, and Charizard got scared at this and covered its eyes instead of flapping its wings, which of course made it start to fall to the ground, and when it fell, it landed on a huge tree branch on the edge of the mountain. This led Corey to grab a rope out of his backpack, and he started to run to the edge of the mountain where Charizard had landed on to try and pull it up and rescue it, but along the way, Corey was panicking too much and ended up losing his footing and falling off the cliff as well, past Charizard on his branch, leading Charizard to desperately cry out for Corey, hoping he was okay. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Benny, Casey, and Shigeo were getting extremely worried, since they'd been waiting for 3 hours at this point for Corey and Charizard to come back from their training, and they hadn't yet. Benny knew that Corey and Charizard should have been back by now, so suggested that he, his father, and Casey all go looking for him, and his father and Casey agree, with Benny stating that if Corey was going to the mountain, then he was likely going to the mountain on Bloom Canyon, and was likely at least still somewhere in Bloom Canyon. So, with that, Casey, Shigeo, and Benny all went into Bloom Canyon, with Casey sending out her Beedrill, Meganium, and Elekid to help scout the area, with Meganium and Elekid searching on the ground, and Beedrill searching in the sky. Benny, Shigeo, and Casey all search, calling for Corey and Charizard, while Meganium and Elekid search on the ground, calling for Corey and Charizard as well, but eventually Beedrill flew back to Casey to report that it actually found something, and led Casey to what it had found, which was the mountain, and specifically the edge of the mountain that Casey looked down to see Dawn the Charizard on the tree branch still, and Corey below Charizard, who thankfully had landed on a small ledge on the mountain, not on the water, not in the water somehow. Casey initially scolds Charizard for not using its flight ability to fly down and rescue Corey, but Corey explained that he really didn't expect Charizard to, since Charizard was extremely scared of water. Not just because it was naturally a fire type, but because back when Charizard was a Charmander, it had accidentally fell into the water before, and since then it had been absolutely terrified of water, and Corey had to work hard just to get Charizard to even dare to fly over the water when it was first practicing. Hearing this, Casey starts to climb down from the edge of the mountain to rescue Charizard and Corey, all on her own, much to Corey's dismay, as he yells at Casey for being so foolish, although Casey simply responds that the electabuzz would never give up on people, so she wasn't going to give up on people either. Although, right as she said this, a storm started to brew, which involved really, really heavy winds, and this wind blew Casey away, leading her to lose her grip on the mountain cliff and fall down into the water. As Casey was screaming though, Corey took action, and he grabbed his rope that he had from earlier, and went into his pitching windup, and threw the rope down really hard towards Casey, who managed to grab it. So, Corey then used all his might to start pulling Casey up with the rope, viewing her as a great fan of the electabuzz, and this motivated him to not let her fall down, since he couldn't bear the thought of him letting a fan of his baseball team fucking die. Unfortunately, Corey was having a lot of difficulty pulling Casey up, because it was a lot of sudden weight on him, but he assured Casey that he would not let go, because the electabuzz would never give up without a fight, and he kept repeating that line over and over and over to himself, as he pulled Casey up fully onto the ledge with him, making Casey glad that Corey had gained his spirit back, now viewing himself as a Team Electabuzz member again. Now that Casey was safe, she hopped on Corey's back, and Corey started to make the long climb back up to the top of the mountain, making Casey impressed at Corey's newfound confidence. He really had his spirit back fully. Unfortunately, though, the storm has now gotten worse as they were climbing, and it was even raining now. So, with the heavy rain combined with the fact that Corey was carrying a little human on his back, it was very tough for him to climb up to the top. Eventually, though, Corey and Casey had almost made it to Charizard, who was looking on, really touched by the fact that Corey and Casey were literally climbing up to save it. Because of its happiness, Charizard managed to somehow gather up enough energy to let out a huge fucking flamethrower, roaring extremely loudly, making Corey and Casey happy. Although, unfortunately, the echo from the roar reverberated everywhere, and it managed to set a boulder loose near the top of the mountain, and it began to fall towards Corey and Casey, although thankfully, Corey was able to pivot while climbing on the mountain and move out of the way just in time. By this point, Shigio, Benny, and Casey's Elekid, Meganium, and Beedrill had showed up at the top of the mountain, since Beedrill had went to gather up everyone else and bring them to where Casey had gone to, even though Casey went on ahead. So basically, Beedrill led Casey to the mountain and then went back to go get everyone else. Just then, though, Corey accidentally put his foot on a rock hanging from the mountain cliff as he was climbing up, and this rock somehow broke off because of the force of Corey's foot, which caused Corey to lose his footing completely, and therefore, him and Casey started to fall down into the water. Seeing this, Casey's Beedrill hurriedly takes action as it flies down to get Corey and Casey, but it couldn't get to them fast enough, and they hit the water and were sucked into a whirlpool, leading Benny, Casey's Pokemon, and Shigio to believe that Corey and Casey had drowned. Although Charizard still had hope that Corey and Casey were still alive, but it was worried about them, so although Charizard was very scared and it had to contemplate for a few seconds on the branch, it decided to make a decision that startled Shigio, Benny, and Casey's Pokemon, because it was something they certainly didn't expect. Charizard was able to fly as it flew off of the branch and dove into the water, overcoming its fear. Benny got extremely worried, crying out for Charizard, since Charizard didn't come out of the water, so he thought that Charizard had drowned. And he only thought this even more when, after a few minutes, nothing was heard or seen from Charizard. But suddenly, Charizard bursts out of the water, carrying Casey and Corey in its arms, and it flies straight to the top of the mountain, going for a fly in the sky in the meantime, making Casey and Corey extremely glad for Charizard that it had regained its flight fully, but also shocked, as they congratulated Charizard. As for Benny and Shigio, they were immensely happy for Charizard as well, as they cheered for it as it went higher and higher into the sky, going past the storm clouds into the sunlight, allowing them all to dry off from the rain. Happy to be dry, Charizard lets out yet another flamethrower, allowing Casey and Corey to officially congratulate it for this one, as they weren't able to, because the last time it used it, the rock fell down on them and shit. Corey then thanks Casey for all of her help with encouraging him and his Charizard, much to Casey's embarrassment, as she claims that although she would take credit for helping Corey regain his spirit, Corey should take full credit for helping Charizard regain its spirit. Charizard continues to fly in the sunlight as Casey and Corey enjoy it. Although much to Casey's surprise, but also joy, Corey reveals that since he had his spirit back, he was now motivated to return to the Electabuzz baseball team, and he was going to later that night when they were playing again. Sure enough, later that night, Corey was back on Team Electabuzz playing for a new game, which was currently in its 9th inning, and the Electabuzzes were ahead 6-5. It was now time for Corey to pitch the ball again, and Corey was a little nervous, but then he looked to the stands and saw his father, Casey, and Benny cheering for him, all wearing Team Electabuzz gear, and he also saw Charizard flying overhead, letting out a flamethrower to signify that he was rooting for Corey. And with that, Corey thanked Casey in his heart for helping Charizard regain its spirit along with him. And he goes into his pitcher windup, and we see him concentrate extremely hard and pitch the ball, while Charizard uses another flamethrower. His pitch was so good that he managed to strike the batter out, and with that, the Electabuzz team officially won the game, and all of the fans in the stands cheered, including Casey, who really celebrated the victory, not just because of the fact that it was an awesome win, but also because it really showed the bond that Charizard and Corey had, since Charizard was able to give Corey some courage to throw the ball thanks to his flamethrower. And the episode then ends with Casey saying the Electabuzz theme song, as she usually did.